Welcome to the answer key explanation video for the Chapter 8 Quiz Number 1 review for Algebra 1. Now you'll see on some of the problems I show more steps than others, but on these first few it's simply taking the rules that we got dealing with exponents and applying them. So in number 1, we simply have x to the 4th times x to the 5th. So our rule of multiplying tells us we need to add the exponents. So 4 plus 5 gives us x to the 9th. In 2, we have a coefficient out in front of both terms. So we need to take the negative 2 times 6, which gives us a negative 12 in front, and then n to the 7th times n to the 3rd, add the powers, gives us n to the 10th. And in 3, we need to multiply the coefficients out in front, so 4 times 5 is 20. X to the 3rd times x to the 4th gives us x to the 7th, and y to the 1st times y to the 3rd would give us y to the 4th. Now on to 4, 5, and 6. In 4, we have a power to a power. So that rule tells us we need to multiply the two powers. So 3 times 6 is 18. So n to the 3rd, in parentheses to the 6th power, gives us n to the 18th. Now in 5, we have in parentheses 2x to the 5th and y. And each part of that's going to the 3rd power. So you can just pull them apart and treat each of them separately. So 2 to the 3rd power is 8. X to the 5th power to the 3rd power, well, 5 times 3 is 15. So we have x to the 15th, and then y to the 3rd. So our final answer would be 8, x to the 15th, y to the 3rd. Now in 6, we have a fraction to a power. So we can just think of this as all parts of the top to the 2nd power and each part of the bottom to the 2nd power. So on top, we have p to the 7th to the 2nd power. So 7 times 2 would give me p to the 14th. On bottom, 4 squared, so 4 squared, gives us 16. V to the 4th to the 2nd power, 4 times 2, gives us v to the 8th. Number 7, we're using our rules for dividing exponents. So y to the 9th divided by y to the 6th, you subtract the powers, 9 minus 6, leaves us with y to the 3rd. In 8, 10x to the 4th divided by 5x to the 3rd, 10 divided by 5 gives us a 2. X to the 4th over x to the 3rd, 4 minus 3 is 1. So that just leaves us with x to the 1st power. So our final answer is 2x. And in 9, we want to first look at the 12 over 15 and see if we can simplify those two numbers. Both can be divided by 3, so that would simplify to 4 on top, 5 on bottom. Then we have a to the 7th over a squared. So dividing the powers means we need to subtract them. 7 minus 2 leaves us with a to the 5th. And that stays on top because we had more a's on top. And then the last part, we have b to the 1st on top, b to the 9th on bottom. So that would give us b to the 8th staying on bottom. Now in 10, anything to the negative power goes below 1. So b to the negative 7th simply becomes 1 over b to the positive 7th. In 11, we have a negative 4, x to the negative 3rd, y to the 8th. So anything to the negative power needs to move to the other side of the fraction. So on top, we still have the negative 4, y to the 8th, but the x to the negative 3rd moves to our denominator. So we'd have negative 4y to the 8th over x to the third. And then in 12, the 6 is not going to any power, so the 6 stays on top. N to the negative fifth moves to the bottom and becomes n to the fifth. M to the negative second moves from the bottom to the top and becomes m squared. So we have 6m squared over n to the fifth. Now in 13 and 14, we want to keep in mind anything to the 0 power is simply 1. So a to the 0 is 1, and then all in parentheses, 7p squared q to the negative fourth, all to the 0 power is still 1. Now in 5, we have a negative 5 out in front of everything, not going to a power, so I know that's going to stay on top. B to the third doesn't need to change, that stays on top. C to the 0 is just 1, so we can just cancel that out. And the d to the negative 2 would have to go to the bottom of our fraction and become d to the second power. So we have a negative 5b to the third over d squared. Now moving to the back page. So with 16, it could look a little bit tricky and overwhelming, but anytime we have a bunch of different terms in parentheses to a power, I would suggest just looking at them separately. So really what we have here is 3 to the negative second, then the x to the fifth to the negative second, y to the 0 to the negative second, and z to the negative second to the negative second. So then if I think about that, 3 to the negative second is the same as 1 over 3 squared. X to the fifth to the negative second would be x to the negative 10th, or 1 over x to the 10th. Y to the 0 is 1, so that would leave us 1 to the negative 2, which is still just 1. And then with z to the negative 2 to the negative 2, negative 2 times negative 2 is a positive 4, so we'd have z to the fourth. So when I look at my different terms, the only thing that should be on top is z to the fourth, and then on bottom I have 3 squared, which is 9, x to the 10th. Now in 17, we have 3a squared in parentheses to the third power, and then negative 2a to the fifth in parentheses to the second power. So we need to take care of our powers first. So 3 to the third power, 3 times 3 times 3 is 27. A squared to the third power is a to the 6. So that becomes 27a to the 6. Then with the second term, or second part, negative 2 to the second power is a positive 4. A to the fifth to the second power is a to the 10th. So then I can multiply the 27 and 4 for 108. A to the 6 times a to the 10th is a to the 16th. So we have 108 a to the 16th. Now with 18 and 19, 18, we first need to take care of the exponent at the end of all of this multiplication. So I'm going to deal with that first. So 4 squared gives me 16. C squared is just c to the second power. D to the fifth squared would be d to the 10th. So now if I bring down what I haven't used, we have this whole big long piece of multiplication. So I want to take just my numbers, 3 and 16, multiply them together to get 48. Now I need to deal with all my c's. C to the fourth, c to the third, and c squared. So 4 plus 3 plus 2 would give me c to the 9th. Then dealing with all the d's, d squared, d to the first, d to the 10th. 2 plus 1 plus 10 is d to the 13th. So our final answer would be 48c to the 9th, d to the 13th. Now in 19, we have a fraction in parentheses to a negative power. So right away, what I'm going to do is I flip the fraction. So the numerator and denominator flip sides, and then it is to the positive second power instead of the negative. So we have 5y to the fourth over 3x to the third, all in parentheses squared. So now we want to square each part of the top and the bottom. So on top, we have 5 squared and y to the fourth squared. And on bottom, 3 squared and x to the third squared. That gives us 25 y to the eighth over 9 x to the sixth. And then we get to 20 and 21. So in 20, we have a fraction, which means division. So 32 n to the negative fourth, p, over 16 n to the third, p to the negative fifth. So first I want to see, can I simplify 32 over 16? Yes, I can. That's just 2. Then we want to deal with the n's. N to the negative fourth would move to the bottom of the fraction. So on bottom, it would be n to the third times n to the fourth, which gives us n to the seventh. Then dealing with the p's, p to the negative fifth on bottom would move to the top. So we'd have p to the first times p to the fifth, which gives us p to the sixth. So we should have 2p to the sixth power over n to the seventh. And then our last computation problem is 21. So we have a fraction times a fraction. Now there's a few ways to do this, but what I'm going to do is just go across the top and then across the bottom. So when I'm dealing with that, I would have on top 3 times 6, which is 18. Then I just have this x here, so it would be an x, and then y to the fourth and y squared would be y to the sixth. Now, if you're wondering why I skipped this x to the negative 3, I'm looking at moving that to the bottom as x to the third. So on bottom, 2 times 4 would give me 8. X to the fifth and that x to the third, when I move it down there, would be x to the eighth. And y times y is y squared. So here I am with 18x times y to the sixth over 8x to the eighth y squared. So can we simplify the 18 and 8? Both can be divided by 2, giving us 9/4. The x to the first over x to the eighth would leave me with x to the seventh on bottom, and y to the sixth over y squared would leave me with y to the fourth on top. So we'd have 9y to the fourth over 4x to the seventh. And then for the graphing, even though I took these questions off the quiz, I still wanted to have you practice these two graphs for the review. So again, what you want to do is graph 5 different points. And my recommendation for what we choose for x is to use a 0, a 1, a 2, a -1, and a -2. So if we take 1/2 to the x power, 1/2 to the 0 power is just 1. So our first point would be 0, 1. 1/2 to the first power is 1/2. So our next point would be over 1, up 1/2. Put a 2 in there, and our answer is 1/4. So we'd be over 2, up 1/4. And then if I do the negatives, 1/2 to the -1 gives us an output of 2, and 1/2 to the -2 is 4. So we plot our points and connect them with the curve, and we should see a curve coming down from left to right. Then in 23, we have y equals 3x. So again, for x, I'm going to put in a -2, -1, 0, 1, and 2. So when I plug those into my calculator, 3 to the 0 power is just 1. 3 to the first is 3. 3 squared is 9. 3 to the negative first would be a 1/3. and 3 to the negative second would be a 1/9. So in this case, plot your 5 points, and you should get a rather steep curve going up left to right. But the key to what will help you on the quiz are numbers 1 to 21 on this review, and then making sure on lessons 8.1, 8.2, and 8.3 that you have your note sheets with the rules at the top.